today is to invite all of you to participate in a debate as to what the contours of this policy should be in practical terms and how should be implemented. And I want to look at a coherent and comprehensive manner because there is a lot of work which has been done on the partial relationships. And let me submit to you that in designing foreign economic policy, we should always keep in mind that such a policy would be a byproduct of the country's larger foreign and domestic economic policies. You cannot have an isolation between the foreign economic policies and your domestic economic policies or the foreign policies large. In the domain of the foreign policy, with due apologies to my friends from the Foreign Service, ambiguity, diplomatic language, curtsies, and sensitivities make a lot and reveal very little. But foreign economic policy must be more direct, focused, target-oriented, and it has to meet its goal. So in the present world, where globalization, technology, demographics, and demand patterns are important drivers of any country's economic policy, we have to reset our present policies in relations to the other countries. We are, at the same time today, we are threatened and have a serious risk because of the climate change, which has already hit us badly. We are also being affected by the changes in the geopolitical power balance, and we are also threatened by a protectionist and pro-nationalist policies which are pursued by many countries in the Western world. So keeping this balance between the positive elements and the negative elements, I would like to submit that what are the primary objectives under these circumstances for Pakistan. And then I would like to present to you for your consideration the instruments which should be used in order to achieve these objectives. In my opinion, this primary objective is to maximize the opportunities offered by globalization and financial integration for the benefit of the majority of Pakistanis and to manage the threats to the Pakistani economy. My calculations show that the country can double its per capita income and reduce poverty significantly within the next 10 to 12 years if this goal is met. Desperate countries such as Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam were able to demonstrate that international trade and foreign direct investment can bring about a miraculous change in the living standards of hundreds of millions of impoverished people. Poverty levels in East Asia are now among the lowest in the world. The success of East Asia was a combination of a smart government and a dynamic private sector working together. And that is essential ingredient for any economic policy, domestic or the foreign. China, as you all know, and I don't have to repeat, did even better than these newly industrialized countries, and it has raised the per capita incomes of 1.2 billion peoples and brought poverty from 50% to 10% because of this integration with the world economy. Another country, our neighbor, which crosses 1 billion mark population with a chaotic and messy democracy, has delivered an annual growth rate of 6% per annum for the last 15 years and reduced the poverty levels to 23% despite very many multifarious problems. And this period from 1991 has been marked by opening up of India, liberalization of trade and foreign investment. So this is where our comparators are. So what are the instruments which will enable Pakistan in its relationships with the foreign partners to achieve the kind of growth path which I have outlined for you. Number one is trade. We have to increase the share of Pakistan in the world exports of merchandise goods and promote regional trade. Second, we have to initiate participation in the export of services, particularly ICT and professional services. This is now growing much faster than the exports of goods in the global markets. Act as a transit route for cross-border flows of goods, infrastructure, and services between Central Asian republics and South Asian republics and Afghanistan. And take part in the global supply chain by providing components, parts, rather than have vertical end-to-end integration. The next is investment. We have to attract foreign direct investment, particularly for exports and manufacturing. So far, the foreign direct investment has come in for domestic markets, while we have to pay them in dollars for repatriation of profits and royalties, and this is creating an imbalance in our balance of payments. So we have to attract them, targeted at our exports and manufacturing. Secondly, we have to encourage the Pakistani companies to place equities abroad and acquire contracts and companies overseas. And India has done a marvelous job in doing so. And you can see the Tata, Jaguar, Rover, Mittal, Steel, Arcelor, and I can go on giving you examples, but these are achievements they have. And then third, that they have to set up joint venture companies with the multinational companies from all over the world, not only in the CPAC, but in the special economic zones. We are open for all multinational companies. Under the heading of technology, we have to promote transfer of technology to Pakistani companies to increase our productivity, which is at below the par as compared to our competitors, and facilitate Pakistani companies in acquiring international presence. Under the labor and manpower, we have to train and supply the type of workers which are required by the labor deficient countries and maximize workers' remittances. And the example which I quote very frequently is that for the first time Japan has opened up its doors to the foreign migrants, but they need a special kind of migrant which is on the IT and professionals. They don't need the unskilled labor, and they have offered Pakistan to be a part of this movement. So we have to train our own people in order to meet the demand of Japan, and Qatar has also asked, and other countries which are really very much interested in utilizing Pakistan's labor force. And we have a youthful, what I call as a youth bulge, which we can bring a dividend to the country. So these are the 10 instruments. And so what I want to do, I won't cover the entire waterfront because that will become too long a discourse. But just for provoking some discussion with this very impressive gathering of luminaries, I have tried to limit myself to 5 bilateral relationships. One with the United States, one with China, one with the Gulf states, with South Asia, and Afghanistan. And my submission is that having worked on Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Azerbaijan, I can say that we can do a lot for these countries, especially for the all Central Asian countries, if we normalize our relations with Afghanistan, which is the transit through which the Pakistani goods and the Central Asian goods can move very freely. So that is the condition. That's why I haven't included Central Asia. And with Iran, I have not really taken it up because of the sanctions imposed by the Western countries. But if you can see, my model is that of the economic empirical evidence which is that neighborhood and the regional trade is the major driver of a country's comparative advantage. And that's why, except China is also our neighbor because of the link with the Western China, but the United States is our biggest partner. So United States is distant, but these are the relationships. And I want to use each instrument tailor-made for relationship with each one of them. So it's not, one shoe fits all, but I have carefully tailored what each country can do for Pakistan in order to meet these particular objectives. So each instrument is tailor-made. For the United States, I'm glad that we are no longer a recipient of the large economic assistance, because that has created bad blood both in the United States for Pakistan and Pakistan for the United States. So I'm happy that after Kerry-Lugar bill, we don't have any significant inflow of assistance from the United States. And I'm also very happy that Biden administration has recently decided to move its focus away from security, FPAC, India-Pakistan hyphenation, to trade, investment, and technology transfer. And this is a highly desirable shift, provided this strategy is executed with full force, because past attempts have been unsuccessful. I went around in 2005 as a governor state bank, met the US Trade, State Department, and White House officials, and also addressed the think tanks for giving concession to Pakistan on the tariffs. We are not asking for concessions. We wanted a level playing field, for the simple reason that textiles in Pakistan are charged 10% tariff duty, while other competitors of ours are either zero duty or 2.5% duty. So all we ask for them is to bring us to the level playing field, but because of the lobbies of North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, which are the textile producers in the US, the senators were not able to do that. And the US Chamber of Commerce has been agitating this issue for the last 15 years. So I hope that the Biden administration would be able to persuade the Congress to provide us this reduction in the tariffs, which will accelerate our exports to the United States markets. And we have a niche in that market because the low end is not produced by the US. US is not competitive at all. So we can complement for the consumers, will benefit from it. And China is no longer in that market because China has got now very high labor wages. So this is something number one. Number two is, whatever you may say, United States still has the wherewithal for foreign direct investment through its companies. And we need that in energy, not in generation, but transmission and distribution. We need for gas pipelines. We need that for oil terminals, LNG terminals, for refining capacity, for petrochemical complex, among others. And there are US investors through the Exim Bank who are prepared to invest in Pakistan and with the guarantees from OPEC. So this is second area where we need the US. But to me, the most important area is that of the technology transfer. Ours is the 21st century, is the century of knowledge. And we lag behind other peer countries, I must confess that, and we have a lot of catching up to do. And the United States is the leader in the world in higher education and scientific and technological research. And just to give you numbers, among the world's top 40 universities, 2/3 are in the US. And technology companies founded less than 2 decades ago feature among the top 10 companies of the world. And you know that, Amazon, Google, Apple, Microsoft, you name them. And of the Nobel Prize winners, 56 out of age 70 are Americans. But 70% of all the global Nobel Prize winners are working in the US universities and labs. That's a huge reservoir of technology and knowledge which we have to tap. And we used to, when I was a student, graduate student in Sindh University, we used to have the US professors, and our professors were trained at Harvard, at Stanford, at Yale, and others. But today, if you look at the Fulbright program, we are sending them for non-scientific subjects. We're sending them for public policy, for development studies, for social policy, for gender studies, which are very soft subjects. We need transfer of technology through education in science, technology, engineering, creative arts, and mathematics, which is called today STEAM. And we used to start that through collaboration with the United States. But unfortunately, the number of Pakistani students working in the US in all, but particularly in the top universities, is dwindling. And in scientific subjects, they are not getting admitted. So that is something we have to really emphasize upon the Biden administration, that they should be quite open as far as our students and the exchange of the scientists is concerned. I just give you a comparison. In 89-90, Pakistani students in the US were more than 7,000, and Indians were 26,000, which is a ratio of 1 to 4. By 2014 and 15, Indian students reached 132,000, while Pakistani students have dwindled to only 5,000, a ratio of 1 to 25. And you can see the progress the Indian companies have made. They have the second largest concentration of research and development facilities of all the big tech companies in Bangalore, in Chennai, in Hyderabad, in Pune. And that is because of this. In China, I don't want to give an example. 500,000 Chinese students trained in the US universities have come back and started their own companies, their own labs, their own research facilities, or they are teaching at the universities. 500,000 people trained in the United States in science, technology, engineering, and maths. Now I come to China. I would submit that there are 3 areas where we have to work very closely. And most of it has to do with us, not with the Chinese. I had the honor of listening to the Chinese companies working in China at Fudan University in a seminar in Shanghai, and most of the problems they were facing were the red tape, the bureaucratic hassle, the lack of coordination between the federal and the provincial governments and the local governments, and they work clockwise. They would say 2 years, they mean 2 years. Here 2 years mean 5 years or 6 years or incomplete. And look, they had the foresight to come with ML1, which will connect Karachi to Peshawar. This is the logistic corridor of Pakistan with 160 kilometers per hour. And this would revolutionize the entire international trade. And we have been sitting on this project for the last 5 years, and no progress has been made. We have very myopic view. So my submission is that all these projects which are on cold burner right now should be brought to completion with an expeditious, implementation timetable supervised and monitored by the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. And Gwadar Port has to be operational because the western corridor between Dera Ismail Khan to Quetta has to be upgraded, and that is what is holding it up. And there are facilities like electricity and water missing in Gwadar, which should be provided. So that's to completely, accelerate our CPAC projects. Number two, I am a great, believer in China's progress as far as the international trade is concerned. They are now the world's largest exporting nation. They have overtaken the United States. We have had 2 free trade agreements, but our exports have not gone anywhere. I propose that with the help of the private sector, the government should keep a target of 1% of the Chinese imports as market share for Pakistan and work backwards in order to identify what are the goods and the services which Pakistan can sell at competitive prices to China. And that has to do with the manufacturing and expansion of the services. We have to get out of this tax mentality where people who are already in the tax net and who are expanding their business, who are in the formal sector, are heavily taxed. That is wrong. We have to bring in the people who are outside the tax net, who are not documented, and keep liberal concessions to the new investors. And that's how Pakistani exports will become competitive. And finally, for China, I would say that we have made these special economic zones. But when I talk to the Chinese companies, they say this is only land which has been given to us. We are not interested in a special economic zone for land. We want all the utilities, facilities in the special economic zone. So play and plug and play. So we can come and use our own configurations in order to start. So if we have electricity, we have gas, we have water, we have sewage, we have roads, we have all other facilities, we will come. And that's true for American companies, that's true for European companies. So we have to rethink our special economic zones, not as a land in a gated, territory, but as a live, thriving economic animal. Also at the same time, the research which has been done by the agriculture scientists in China, which are very much close to some of the problems we are facing, can be applied to increase our yields per acre. And that means that our researchers have to be trained in China, and the Chinese researchers have to come to our institutions like the Pakistan Agriculture Research Council, Ayub Research Institute. And that will make us, upward on the curve of productivity. With Afghanistan, there are more well-informed people, former foreign secretaries, former ambassador to Afghanistan who are more capable than I am. But my impression is that if we keep on, waiting for the perfect solution to Afghanistan, which is a messy situation right now because nobody in the world has recognized them, we are going to be at a disadvantage economically because our corridor to Central Asian republics is through Afghanistan. So India also wants the corridor through Pakistan, through Afghanistan to the Central Asian republics. So look at the value of the transit trade and the fees they would be able to get through and give a stability, because today the foreign aid has just completely disappeared. And we are suffering because our foreign currency is being used by the Afghani traders in order to import goods. So we having pressure on our exchange rate. So my submission is that we should have, once the political recognition takes place, because that's a big if, and I don't know when it's going to take place, to have a free trade area and a free trade agreement with Afghanistan. Our wheat is still going there, right? It's not going through the legal means, it's going through illegal means. Whenever we have, shortage of commodities, there are a lot of commodities which are coming in through Afghanistan. Now coal, which has become very expensive in South Africa and Australia, is coming through Afghanistan at half the rate. But you don't have trade facilitation. You have a lot of problems at the cross-border crossings. You have only Chaman and Torkham and there are trucks which are lining up, miles altogether. This is not how you do business. So we have to liberalize our transportation sector so the trucks from Afghanistan can come to Pakistan and go to the destination, and Pakistani trucks can go to Afghanistan and deliver the goods, whether it is in Kandahar or whether it is Iraq or whether it is in Kabul. And once you have the Gwadar port active, and as I told you, every Central Asian republic is prepared to transit their trade through Gwadar because it's the cheapest route as compared to the present routes. So my other proposal is that Afghanistan is an LDC, a least developed country. And you see, Bangladesh has taken full advantage of its LDC status with zero tariffs in Europe and zero tariff in the United States. Why don't we set up industrial zones in Afghanistan with the help of Pakistani businesses and Afghanistan partners and export the goods from Afghanistan through Gwadar or through Karachi to the international markets and enjoy this LDC status for Afghanistan for our advantage and also for creating employment in Afghanistan and stability, economic stability there. So I have seen that there was some movement during Obama and Bush administration, but since then it has not. It was a reconstruction zone which is more vague. This was more in the tribal areas of Pakistan, but my proposal is more towards the heartland of Afghanistan, Kandahar, Kabul, Jalalabad, Herat, and others. I also feel that CPAC should be extended to include Afghanistan. And that will make a lot of sense, both to Chinese investors as well as the Afghanistan. Now I come to Gulf states. We have very good relations with the Gulf states. Saudi Arabia and UAE have absorbed a very large number of our workers, and they are also providing us petroleum products and crude oil. And Qatar has long-term contracts for LNG. But the latest Economist magazine has predicted that the Gulf states would earn $3.5 trillion in the next 5 years in response to the re-engineering of global energy flows arising from the Western sanctions, climate change, and remaking of geopolitical alliances in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia and UAE aim to raise their output from 13 million barrels per year to 16 million. Qatar is already a big player in the LNG markets. And because of what is happening between Russia and European markets on LNG, they are planning to expand their North Field gas reservoirs at a cost of $30 billion in the next 5 years, which would raise the LNG output annually from 77 million tons to 126 million tons. So my proposal is that we should enter into long-term contracts for our energy needs, LNG, as well as the petroleum with the Gulf at this point of time, before it is allocated to the others. Second, enormous investment will take place in these Gulf states. So we should not only send our workers, but our companies, Pakistani companies, should win contracts for projects in Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, and that is a much better proposition. I have seen Indian companies who have established themselves in Indonesia, in Mexico. They take all the Indian workers along with them, and because there are Indian workers, the exports from India also increase, especially of the consumable goods, and there is a multiplier effect of their presence in this country. So it's just not the workers' remittances or company profits, but it's a multiplier effect for the rest of the exports also. So I personally think that we have to change this strategy from just sending our, unskilled labor to skilled and semi-skilled, but also have our companies participate in this project. I come now to the final, which is South Asia, which is a very difficult and knotty subject because of the tensions between India and Pakistan. We were almost so close in 2014 in signing the Most Favored Nation Agreement, which Pakistan had not granted to India, in February 2014. But because Mr. Modi sent a message to our Foreign Office at Taj Alisa that this will be a violation of the electoral practices where the Congress Party will take the credit for this agreement, so they should wait for this agreement till they come to power. But that day has never come, and we are still struggling. My submission, and this I have made in Indian audiences many times, is that you are a country which has 80% of the population, 85% of GDP. No other region has one single country dominating to that extent. China has only 40% share of the GDP in the whole East Asia. Now, if you are such a big player, you have to recognize that you cannot use reciprocity and equality in treatment with the lesser endowed countries. And you have ambition to become a regional power and a global power. How can you do this if you have dissatisfied neighbors at your doorsteps? They will always create irritants for you. So if you have these ambitions, you please try to reconcile your external economic relations with your neighbors in South Asia. And all studies, I did my first study in 2004 sectorally, and Pakistan-India trade at that time would have multiplied by 5 times. Today, because all these economies have really expanded, the World Bank says the India-Pakistan trade would multiply by a factor of 20. Look at the kind of, benefits. We will still be 1% of their imports of India, because India is now almost 400 or 500 billion of the imports. We will still be very tiny. But look at the welfare benefits to our farmers, to our factories, to our consumers. All our medicines, APIs, which are the raw materials, are imported from India. And our medicines will become cheaper for our consumers if we do that trade. So my submission is that India has to be, in their behavior and their attitude, act according to their stature and their ambition. I don't want to have a blame game, but at least there are 2 areas which are regional public goods. One is the water resources, because we share the Himalayan Karakoram range and the glacial melting is taking place. Indus Water Treaty has really done well despite all the wars in India and Pakistan. We have to negotiate a new treaty with India as far as the water resources is concerned, because we are going to have droughts. As the glaciers melt very rapidly, we will have droughts and flooding. And we have to take joint measures in the interest of both India and Pakistan in order to contain the, what I call the pernicious effects of this climate change. And the other one, I think, is that they should be a little bit more magnanimous in allowing people-to-people contacts. For example, the cricket match between India and Pakistan is the largest crowd puller all over the world. Now, I've seen Pakistani teams coming to India and Indian teams coming, and the goodwill which it created was tremendous. The musicians of Pakistanis, the actors who go from Pakistan to India and they come to Pakistan, had created goodwill among the people. So at least if they don't do anything else, they should allow and liberalize the movement of people to people. And that's no threat to a big country like India. To sum up, and I think I've taken much of your time because I want to listen to you and benefit from your feedback and your comments. To sum up, Pakistan has to reset its foreign economic relations towards geoeconomics, but that requires that our own domestic economic policies, our management and governance are put on a sound footing. That is the prerequisite. Continued political instability, uncertainty about policies, and frequent economic crisis would not bring any change from the present status quo, in which case we would remain a marginal player in a very rapidly changing world and losing our dignity. I feel very ashamed when our leaders go to IMF off and on and they say, can't you do anything in order to put your economy on a footing that you don't need us? And that we have to go to Saudi Arabia or China and ask for bailout. This is undignified. This has to stop. And this relationship with trade, investment, technology transfer, and labor market absorption are the instruments which will lead us away from this dependence on the IMF and our bilateral. So it's not lack of diagnostics or prescriptions to solve these problems, but I'm sorry to say we have an inward-looking mindset where processes are given precedence over outcome and results. Unless we remove this inbuilt disdain for anything foreign, including the overseas Pakistanis, we would become more insular and disconnected from the tide of progress that is benefiting other emerging developing countries. Our mindset should be quite extensive, quite expensive,